Warning, the episode that follows is not suitable for young children or young adults. Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast, the ultimate blueprint to self-love and inner peace. I'm your host, Danielle Van. As a cognitive behavioral therapist, a life coach, meditation teacher, and author, I've spent my life studying and learning from the stories that make us human. It's my passion and goal to help you shift your mindset and create a lifelong revolution to help you reach your greatest potential. Get comfortable, sit down, have a moment, because we are talking about sex. Because let's face it, when we are getting our lives together, when we're talking about relationship, we have to talk about all of the elements, and that includes the physical self. I sat down and had a riveting conversation with therapist Brook Bralove, who is a certified sex therapist. And together, she and I broke down what it means to have great sex, the female anatomy, which is going to surprise a lot of people that you may not know exactly what's going on down there, the value of bringing tools into the bedroom, and we lean into what it means to be willing to try and how to have uncomfortable conversations that could lead to a really great sex life. So let's have a little fun and not be so serious. Let's get right to it. The Get Your Life Together Girl podcast starts right now. One thing that I see so often coming into session are couples that are struggling with intimacy and sex. So we're going to have a deep conversation today about how to turn this around. Now, if you have little ones listening, it may not be the most appropriate conversation, but we want to be able to actually welcome in a healthy intimacy into our marriage. Brooke, please introduce yourself. Tell us about who you are, and let's get into a topic that a lot of people struggle to talk about.
Well, first of all, Danielle, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Brooke Bralove. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and psychotherapist in Bethesda, Maryland. I've been in private practice 20 years, and I'm an ASEX certified sex therapist. And I've been doing that since 2019, although I did it for many years before that, before I got the certification. And I love working with adults, couples, and individuals who are, struggling with all the sort of issues you mentioned. And it's actually a lot of fun. I really enjoy it.
Talking about sex is actually a fun thing, and a lot of people do have this taboo feeling around it. Before we dive in, what is your thoughts behind that? Is it just societal, or that we've been told we don't talk about these things? What's your thoughts?
It really is societal, but it's also what gets said in the home. And I think people they underestimate the power of the implicit messages about sex, about one's body, about the way someone dresses. I was talking with a woman yesterday and she said, "Oh, my parents were very liberal, they were fine, like very open about sex." And then I dug deeper, and they have vivid memories of, their father saying, "You can't wear that outside the house. What will people think? And you'll be in danger." And so these messages, they live inside us.
Right.
And I really do feel that shame and sexuality go hand in hand. And it is so important to really try to, separate out that shame and name it, because again, people don't even understand that it really is inside of them. And it gets in the way of a healthy, happy, wonderful sexual, experience, both with themselves and with partners.
I love that you started there, because that is so very true. How do we identify the sexual feelings that we have and be okay with it? And where is that space where a lot of people go, whoa, 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 I can't actually dive into this because of that mixed messaging that we received? It is a very difficult thing for a lot of people to kind of deconstruct. And most people don't even realize that there is a problem to begin with.
Right. And that is the first step, right? Is just to identify. And so we really start with what were the first messages you received about your
Hmm.
body. And that goes back, to, toddlerhood. Obviously most people don't have memories before age 3, but, how did your parents refer to your genitals? Was it a wee
Yeah.
wee and a hoo-ha?
Right.
Well, that's not appropriate. And first of all, the main thing that I really correct people on, right, is it's not a vagina, it's a vulva. And
Right.
so we first have to get the correct words and
Hmm.
encourage parents to just, you do the where's your nose, where's your eyes,
Right.
where's your lips. Well, it's a body part. These are
Right.
body parts and they deserve to be, I think, almost like respected and given
Hmm.
their proper names and as just a part of one's healthy body.
Yeah.
So I think that really starts. And also, you know, people get early messages about masturbation.
Right.
Toddlers masturbate. They,
Hmm.
young children, they, grind on a, arm of a couch.
Right.
And what messages did you get about that? Did you have a horrified parent who said, don't
Hmm.
you ever touch yourself, or do
Yeah.
you have a parent who says, hey, I bet that feels good. That
Right.
makes sense. Let's make sure we do that in the privacy of our own room and when we're alone. Those
Right.
are totally different messages, and they
Hmm.
create very different kinds of people who have a
Hmm.
lot of, different feelings about their own bodies
Right.
and whether their own bodies are shameful and whether self-pleasure is shameful. I mean, obviously, we don't want our kids masturbating at a dinner party,
Right.
but there's nothing, and to validate that, I bet that feels good.
Right.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. And there's nothing wrong with doing something to make your body feel good as
Hmm.
long as it's safe, consensual, et cetera.
Right. You just brought something to my mind. I was speaking with a young adult yesterday, and they said, well, they were looking at my inappropriate parts. And I said, oh, okay, we're going to stop right there. What are we talking about? Inappropriate parts. This is a natural part of your actual physique. How is it inappropriate? Just like you said, obviously, we want to have some kind of self understanding and self constraint in certain places, but inappropriate parts or calling it pet names or,
Yeah, I mean, I think it was Oprah who came up with VJJ, Oprah and
yes,
Gail. And
right,
so that went on for a number of years. I'm not sure people are using that anymore, but
right,
I'm not sure I think that in and of itself is a problem
right.
because I actually think it helped women own that their
Mm,
vulvas a little bit
hmm.
more. I mean, it wasn't accurate, but so I don't
Right,
think it's always a problem,
right,
and a lot of people find power in the word pussy, right? And
right.
so pussy power. And so if that allows you to feel pride,
Hmm.
then that's fine. I mean, it's
Right.
not, I think as an adult, you get to make decisions
It's
about
true.
how you refer, but you
Yeah.
need as a child to be
Hmm.
given the correct factual information. And
Yeah.
I love what you said. I had a friend years ago who would say, I don't let my, housekeeper, wash my bras and underwear. And
Right.
and I was like, really? And she's like, well, yeah, they're my unmentionables.
Right.
And I was like, wow, even that
Yeah,
is
even
so
that.
fascinating.
Yeah. It's interesting. We're talking about just physique itself. And it is something that I have noticed, what you're alluding to is that most women don't actually understand the makeup of not only their vagina, but exactly even what, the breast is for, or the parts or the pleasure centers. Maybe we should start there for just a moment.
That is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
I am absolutely amazed by
Yeah.
how many women and also men
Men. Yeah.
do not know where the clitoris is
Right.
and what it actually looks like.
Right.
So sometimes I will, I have a friend, Dr. Rachel Rubin, who's a wonderful urologist and sexual medicine specialist, and she has
Mhm.
a clitoris necklace. And I just love it because she's just walking around, and I'm sure half the people are probably going, "What is
What is
that?"
that?
Because, the clitoris is unbelievably fascinating. And it's
Hmm.
not just, I think, what some people think of as, that little sort of knob at the top of
Right.
your vulva. It extends much further down and it
Hmm.
has so many nerve endings. And
Right.
so, first of all, there is no one talks about the clitoris at all. You certainly don't talk about it in any sex ed program,
Right.
but it's just not talked about. And
Hmm.
how is it that an organ that is only there for pleasure, that's its
Right.
only function, it has no other function whatsoever,
Right.
doesn't get talked about? And so
Hmm.
there I really think you're looking at, the sort of patriarchal, kind of misogynistic
Hmm.
society we live in. We don't really give a shit about someone's clitoris because we don't really give a shit about women's pleasure.
Yeah.
And that is a problem. But
Right.
so
It is.
first of all, and again, just showing women what it looks like, pointing it
Hmm.
out, and encouraging them to explore themselves.
Right.
This is so important. One of the things I really try to assess is, have you ever looked at your vulva?
Right.
Have you, and people get very
Freaked
uncomfortable. And
out.
the
Yes.
idea of, getting a mirror and looking at it is
Hmm.
terrifying.
Right.
But I've encouraged my teenage daughters to make sure they do that so
Yeah.
they know what it looks like and get comfortable. There is
Hmm.
so much shame about vulvas.
Right.
Mine doesn't look like others,
Hmm.
mine isn't the same color as other people's. And again, we do see other vulvas, right? In the
Yeah.
locker rooms,
Hmm.
when you and your girlfriends are changing. So
Hmm.
we do end up seeing other ones. And I'm
Right.
sure men do this with their penises as well. I just
Sure.
don't talk to as many men about this. I
Right.
do, my practice is a lot of, heterosexual cis women.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting too. I mean, let's talk about this. The fact that, again, its number one purpose is to have pleasure, and yet we don't even know where it is. And if we don't know where it is, we're kind of expecting our partners to find it. And then we're like, we can't have an orgasm. We don't know why. What's wrong with me? Well, have you actually even taken a moment to figure out what's going on down there?
Yeah, I mean, I always say in the first session of sex therapy, spoiler alert, your homework is going to be to masturbate.
Right.
And, that homework goes on for a long time
Right.
because, yes, I also see many women with anorgasmia, which is simply the,
Right.
inability to have an orgasm. And that's hard. That's hard work because you really
Yeah.
do have to assess certainly whether there's a hormonal aspect, whether
Hmm.
there's an anatomical aspect. You have a clitoral hood,
Hmm.
and sometimes the clitoral hood is actually attached to the clitoris, and
Hmm.
so it doesn't retract in the way it should, and so there's not access to the actual nerve endings. And there is
Right.
a very simple surgery,
Mhm.
very, very simple, that can be done to correct that. So
Right.
first of all, I always rule out medical stuff first.
Right.
So check your hormones, make sure that someone is looking, not someone, a trained professional
Yes.
gynecologist, urologist, sexual
Right.
medicine specialist to look at your genitals to make sure there's
Hmm.
actually nothing anatomically that is going on that might be problematic.
Right.
And then a lot of it is often, emotional.
Hmm.
And I see a lot of women with trauma in my practice, and
Right.
many of the people who haven't had an orgasm have some sexual trauma in their
Right.
history. Not
Yes.
always, of course.
Right.
But also you see a lot of people with a lot of, generalized anxiety who can't
Right.
have an orgasm because it is the most vulnerable thing in the world to do.
Right.
And they haven't even necessarily masturbated. I mean, a lot of women who are in their 50s have never
Hmm.
masturbated.
Right.
And I actually feel kind of sad for those women because they've really missed out on a lot
Hmm.
of self-pleasure
Right.
and ways. I mean, I also tell people, masturbation's good for you.
Right.
It increases blood flow, which is really important in terms of
Right.
kind of almost teaching the clitoris how to have an orgasm. And
Right.
also, they can't even identify what pleasure is.
Mm-hmm.
So when
Mm-hmm.
I often will just start with what's pleasurable.
Right.
And the sad part is people say, I don't
I
know.
don't know. Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, well, does sunshine feel good on your face? And
Mm-hmm.
they'll say, well, I mean, I guess. And so you have a lot of women who've dissociated for various
Mm-hmm.
reasons from their bodies. And so
Right.
my job is to help them get back in their bodies.
Mm.
And that can be really scary, especially if you've been violated.
Right.
Trying to tell yourself it's safe to experience pleasure
Yeah.
is a terrifying thing for many women.
Agreed. I see that too. Let's take the conversation there about getting into the body because it is one of the most terrifying anxiety-driven things that I know both of us see, especially as if you have had sexual trauma of some sort. Where would you advise women to start? Obviously, we've talked about masturbation and self-exploration. How do we get inside
Mhm.
ourselves?
Well, I think we start with sort of what I said, which
Hmm.
is, notice how you are impacted, how your
Hmm.
body is impacted by things in your environment.
Right,
So when the wind blows, can you figure out where you feel that?
right.
Is it on your cheeks? Is it, at the back of your neck? And really just almost like it's really a mindfulness practice. I mean, at the end of
Right.
the day, meditation
Yeah.
and sexuality actually go very well together because, frankly, if you are not mindful, you are not going
Right.
to have an orgasm or feel pleasure. So I
Right.
start real basic. I don't go to the genitals for quite a while
Right.
when I'm trying to help somebody with their, sexuality and be more comfortable
Mhm.
with their bodies.
Right.
So first it'll be, the sunshine and the wind, and then it'll be, putting something cold on their face or on
Right.
their arms and something
Sensation.
warm, and
Hmm.
then working with a feather or silk or, and working on like textures and
Right.
almost narrating to themselves. I'm
Hmm.
I'm stroking my forearm with a feather.
Hmm.
It feels light, it feels soft, it feels,
Yeah.
tickly, whatever. And then we just work there for a while, which is
Right.
non-sexual touch. And that's
Hmm.
very important, is
Right.
just to be able to get in your body around completely non-sexual touch.
Right.
And then we would kind of move it forward a little bit. We might
Mhm.
ask someone to, try to stroke their breasts with those types of things. And
Hmm.
again, almost narrating either out loud or to themselves.
Right.
The other piece is the breath. You
Mm.
cannot have mindfulness without the breath.
Right.
And you actually can't orgasm without
That
the
breath.
breath being
Yes.
impacted and sort of focusing on breath. And
Hmm.
so I do a lot of just trying to help people use the breath to
Mm.
deepen their own sense of self, right? Most of us don't even know how to take a deep breath. We
Exactly.
don't
Yeah.
even know what that means. Right. So
Hmm.
again, you're teaching some basic things, but what I actually really love is that mindfulness and sexuality go hand in hand. So, if
Hmm.
you teach someone to try to do some meditation, having nothing to do with sexuality,
Hmm.
their sexuality is going to benefit, their pleasure is going to
Yeah.
benefit from that.
Yeah. I teach a lot of people meditation, and that's one thing that I hear a lot. It's like, I actually found myself like turned on in the experience. I'm like, fantastic. That's great. And they're like, no, it freaked me out. I'm like, no, it's great. You're releasing all those blocks and the hormones, and this is a good thing. Why would you not want to experience that? That's a part of pleasure. And people are scared as hell about pleasure. Oh my gosh. It's unreal.
Yeah, and I do think here's where we, really want to kind of take a moment to talk
Mhm.
about trauma
Yes.
and for many people, especially maybe if they were younger and they
Hmm.
had sexual abuse or
Right.
molestation, they may have experienced some pleasure with the abuse.
Yes.
And certainly sometimes feeling special if there was sort of an
Mhm.
ongoing relationship. And this is what creates the most shame. It's actually not the sexual
Right.
abuse itself, it's that children, may actually feel pleasure from it, which
Right.
is absolutely confusing,
Uh-huh.
terrifying. And so if you ask someone, they've basically felt that pleasure is bad and it's because
Right.
it's associated with abuse.
Right.
So then you tell someone, hey, why aren't you feeling pleasure? What's wrong with you? Come on.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
should. It's a good thing.
Right.
That doesn't make sense to their nervous system at all.
Correct.
And that's why you just work on total body safety for a
Hmm.
while.
Right.
And, again, like working on mantras of I'm safe with
Right.
myself. I'm in control of my
Mm.
touch and what it feels like. And you really have to try to dismantle pleasure from abuse. And
Yes.
that can take a long time. That's hard.
And it is hard, and it does require someone like us who's trained to help understand that safety and trust, shame, blame, and that the body does what the body is naturally meant to do, right? We can't brain hack that a lot of times. We can suppress it, but feelings come because there's stimulation, right? And so we take that kind of shame and blame away. As we talk about all of these things, we're getting into our bodies. How do we transfer what's happening with us individually into a sexual experience that's healthy? Because that's the other thing that I see is most people do not understand what a healthy sexual experience looks, feels, and can translate to.
Hmm. Well, I think first you're looking at trust,
Yeah,
and you have to have a
safety.
partner you trust.
Hmm.
I'm not one of these people who say you have to be madly in love to have a trusting sexual relationship. I
Agreed.
don't,
Agreed.
I mean, I think we can just, forget that. If you also love the person deeply, that is
Hmm.
amazing. And it
Right.
certainly enhances things, but it's not necessarily necessary.
Right.
But a really trusted partner who will completely listen to you about
Hmm.
your boundaries. And
Right.
so, you know, talking, communicating
Hmm.
about what you like. And again, you can't translate this unless you figured out what you like.
Right.
So, really healthy communication. Certainly, if you have a trauma history, talking about that beforehand, letting the
Right.
person know, and making sure they understand that you need to be in charge of the
Hmm.
sexual experience and the pace at which it moves,
Yes.
and that you have really talked about, in BDSM, there's sort of these code words for, stop, slow down, and keep
Right.
going, red light, yellow light, green light, or whatever you come up with. I actually encourage people to have that in, a non-BDSM relationship as well,
Right.
so that there's a shorthand,
Hmm.
for, and that your partner knows immediately that when you say red, everything stops,
Everything.
everything
Yeah.
immediately.
Yeah.
And that yellow means I need you to slow down a bit. I need you to,
Hmm.
be a little more patient, that kind of thing.
Right.
And so there's no doubt that the absolute heart of a healthy sexual relationship is trust and communication.
Right.
And I also think reciprocity. When I talk to
Hmm.
teenage girls, I mean, they're giving blowjobs out like it's, a kiss.
Right.
And again, I really don't mean that in a shaming way at all.
Right.
What
Yeah.
I really mean is, but how often is your partner,
Right.
going down on you and giving you oral sex? And they'll
Right.
say, well, never.
Not. Yeah.
And then that's where I have a problem, right? Is that there's a lack of reciprocity.
Hmm.
So I do think that's really important. Is your partner also interested in your pleasure? And I
Right.
don't necessarily mean, is your partner interested in your orgasm? Because
Hmm.
actually women say that they feel pressure when their partner is like, well, you haven't had an orgasm,
Let's
so we have
go.
to we
Yeah.
have to get you, and I
Hmm.
often say that's just more pressure, and women feel
Right.
that. So they
Hmm.
want to have a pleasurable experience.
Yeah.
And if pleasure leads to orgasm, yes. But
Right.
sometimes you can just have a pleasurable experience. So I also
Agreed.
think a healthy sexual relationship is not orgasm focused.
Mm. Thank you for saying that. So many men that come in with their wives are so focused on that. And the women are like, listen, I don't have to every time. And they're like, yes, you do. It's like, that's not your grade A, right? Like, that doesn't mean that the experience was perfect or worked for both people. Sometimes we just don't get there, and that's okay. Did you have fun? Do you feel pleasurable? And even, for me, when we're talking about couples, I'll say, play around. Let the focus be on just one person that time. Let that one person have the full experience. And then next time you have the experience for the other person. That feels very odd to a lot of people too.
Yeah, I love this idea of taking turns. I think that's
Yeah.
beautiful. I think I'll do that more in my practice, but it
Yeah.
is really wonderful, which is, hey, today, like, I just want to, make you happy and
Right.
we'll agree that that's that. And,
Hmm.
you do hope at some point it goes the other way for another sexual experience. But
Right.
I really love that idea. It's why I hate 69, which is,
Yes.
mutual oral sex. There, you cannot focus at all. There is too
That's what I
much
was gonna
going
say.
on,
Right.
right? So that doesn't, I mean, I really don't think there's a lot of pleasure. I mean, maybe people find
Right.
pleasure in it, but to me, you can't focus on your own pleasure when it's just too
Mhm.
confusing. There's too much going on. So for all those people who want to, check that off their, bucket list, it's a little overrated.
Right.
But yeah, I do think, I mean, the word play is so important, play and fun.
Hmm.
So with a lot of sex, and especially in long-term relationships,
Right.
there's no play, there's no
Hmm.
fun, and I
Hmm.
also there's no humor. You gotta laugh at some
Mm.
things that happen in sex because
Right.
things happen. There's
Yeah.
noises that are kind of weird
Yes.
that come out. They're little, I mean, things happen and it's messy,
Yeah.
and you gotta be able to laugh at it.
Yeah.
And, because I think the humor is the antidote for shame in sexual relationships.
That is very, very powerful. When we're talking about this, when we're talking about play, one of the things that I hear a lot of women say is, it's fine, it's okay. It's actually kind of boring, which is why I don't want to do this. It's not that I don't love you or that I'm not sexually attracted to you or that I want to enjoy in the intimacy. It's that I'm literally bored. I'm like, well, what are we doing? Are we in the same position all the time? Are we in the bed the whole time? Like, what's happening? And that's it. It's very missionary. There's no play. There's no, foreplay. There's no touch. It's just, let's get this done. We have 5 minutes. Nobody's going to have a great time when we're in that kind of mindset.
hmm Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I mean, one of the things that, couples hate hearing is you got to schedule sex, right? And
Right.
of course they, go ballistic. And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. You schedule everything else. So,
Right.
if it's important to you, put it on your calendar.
Hmm.
And, I just tell them to get over it. And I turn my language to sex dates or sexual
Mm.
dates or sexy dates or whatever, because it certainly doesn't mean, intercourse. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, you've got to have time. Now,
Hmm.
look, I actually think there is space for a quickie, which
Sure.
is, I mean, and nobody, that's not about amazing amount of pleasure. It's,
Right.
I need a little release or it's been a
Yeah.
while or whatever. So I think,
Right.
but I think it's like you have to know what you're going into. Are we
Yes.
taking our time and
Mm.
relaxing? Is this a 15-minute thing?
Hmm.
Do we have an hour? What are the
Right.
expectations?
Yeah.
But absolutely you need time. And
Mhm.
this is the major problem. People in long-term relationships, they stop kissing.
I was just
Ask
talking about this yesterday.
Mhm. Yeah, ask a couple who's been, married, I mean, really 5+ years
Right.
sometimes. When was the last time they made out?
Right.
And they can't remember.
Yeah.
So what I do a lot of in sex therapy, let's get back to basics.
Yeah.
Let's remember before you ever had intercourse, how exciting French
Hmm.
kissing was,
Right.
how exciting it was, base 1 and 2 kind of
Right.
thing, right?
Hmm.
That was amazing.
Right.
That got you lubricated. That,
Hmm.
gave you an erection. Get
Right.
back to that. So
Yeah.
one of the most important things I do in sex therapy is I tell people they can't have intercourse. It's
Ooh.
off the table. I
Okay.
do that. And usually, again, I'm being very, stereotypical, and I'm
Right.
really talking about heterosexual, cis, monogamous
Right.
couples right now. So I just own that bias.
Yeah.
But the women, they look so relieved most of the time
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to have intercourse
Right.
necessarily, because that's not necessarily the most pleasurable thing.
Right.
Very few women can have an orgasm from vaginal penetration alone. I think it's
Right.
13%.
Yeah.
That's low.
Mm-hmm.
It's much higher for clitoral stimulation.
Right.
So when you take intercourse off the table, you actually create the excitement
Right.
because there's something you can't do. It's like it adds a barrier that can be very exciting. Well, we
Mm-hmm.
can't do that, so let's see what we can
What we
do.
can we do? Yeah.
And you focus on that.
Yeah. I will often tell my couples that are in marriage, counseling with me, go make out. And they're like, no. I'm like, okay, then what are we doing? What are we doing here? Right? Because you're trying to build intimacy with each other, excitement, play, fun, that space, exactly what you're talking about, where we used to be. And it scares a lot of people. It's so interesting. It's like, didn't you enjoy that in the very beginning? Well,
Right.
yeah.
And guess what? Some couples, I mean, there are, I will occasionally, I usually see a couple, then I meet with each person individually to find out
Hmm.
more about, really
Right.
where they are. And then I go right back to the
Yeah.
couple. I only usually have one session with each. But, sometimes you hear, she's never been a great kisser, or,
Yeah.
I really don't like kissing her. And
Right.
then I'll give a homework assignment when I hear that of, I want you to set a timer for 15 minutes,
Hmm.
and I want you to focus on kissing. And I
Hmm.
want you to teach your partner how you
Mm.
like to be kissed,
Hmm.
and where, and with
Right.
what pressure, and how much tongue.
Right.
And, because a lot of people really, I mean, it's sort of like a thing. They come in and they're like, it's so wet and sloppy, men
So
and women,
gross.
right?
Yeah.
And they're grossed out. Well, of
Right.
course you're not going to
Yeah.
kiss if you find, if your partner was never a good kisser. And first of all, by the way, for people who are, starting a sexual relationship,
Hmm.
teach your partner now how you like
Right.
to be kissed, because a lot of
Hmm.
people will say, we've been, married 30 years, I can't tell him he's a bad kisser.
Yeah.
And first of all, I'm like,
Yes, you
you're right,
can.
you can't tell him he's a bad kisser. But what you can say is, I was thinking, I've kind of changed in how I like to be
Hmm.
kissed.
Hmm.
That's a way to just soften it, right?
Right.
So, could I teach you, or could we teach each other?
Hmm.
I've never asked you how you like to be kissed. So,
Hmm.
I give the homework assignment. And by me giving the homework assignment, they don't have to shame each other, they don't have to
Yeah.
embarrass each other. And, that can be really fun once you've taught your partner. But
Yeah.
speak up, people, young people, older
Uh-huh.
people who are just
Uh-huh.
starting, speak up.
Yeah.
Say,
Yeah.
hey, I like, I like a little less tongue, or I like a little less deep, or could you do it
Hmm.
harder? Or,
Yeah.
you've got to speak up early in
Yes.
sexual relationships, because the longer you don't, the more you're teaching your partner that you like the thing they're
That they're
doing,
doing.
which
Yeah.
is not true.
Yeah. Speaking up, let's talk about that for a minute because when we get into the rhythm of relationships, like you just mentioned, we feel like it's too late or that we're going to shame or that we can't actually use our voice. I have found, and I'm sure you have, once you've taught your partner what you actually like, they enjoy being guided. It's actually fun for them because you're actually providing them with sort of the roadmap to your own pleasure.
Yeah, look, we want to please our partner unless
Yeah.
we're, narcissistic assholes. But otherwise, we want to please our partner. In fact,
Hmm.
some men specifically really talk about that they are most excited and
Hmm.
aroused when their partner is. That
Right.
is the biggest turn on for
Yeah.
men.
Yeah.
So when you give them, a guide,
Right.
they are appreciative, because then they get reinforced,
Right.
when they hear you moaning. And by the way, make sure you're making sounds if you
Yes.
like it, right? So that's feedback. I had a couple and the woman was like, my husband is
Yeah.
silent, throughout every time,
Right.
and I'm like, oh my God, well, that must feel terrible because you have no
Yeah.
idea whether he's enjoying anything, whether it's with words or sounds. So I really encourage people to start making more sounds. And you can
Mm,
actually practice while you're masturbating
right.
because whatever it feels good, make a sound, make a moan. And that's hard for people, right?
Yeah.
That brings up a ton of embarrassment and shame. But you just start real small. You
Yeah.
just asking people to take a one little step outside their comfort zone and do something a little bit different. But
Mm,
absolutely people want to be taught.
yeah.
That's sexy. It's also sexy for, a woman to say, do it harder, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's sexy to a lot of men
Right.
because they're owning their pleasure, which is a
Right.
sexy thing.
It's a sense of empowerment that most women are not free enough to actually own. And I will say this, I have experienced a lot of men that come in and say, I didn't know what to do. I've never had a partner who actually expressed that. And I kind of froze. I didn't know. I'm like, well, okay, let's walk through that a little bit. Have you seen that as well?
Yeah, men don't know what to do. I mean, if
Right.
women don't know what their clitoris looks like, how in the world do
Mhm.
men know?
Right.
And so, I mean, frankly, they fumble around,
Yeah.
quite a bit, right?
Mhm.
And you really have to say, this is what I like.
Yeah.
Or, and I do want to just say one thing here.
Yeah.
Women need to speak up, men too,
Mhm.
the second there is pain.
Right. Yes.
I work with so many women who talk about sex being painful for
Yeah.
years. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a woman the other day, not in her 30s, not once has she had intercourse without pain,
Wow.
right? And
Wow.
so, I mean, of course, you need to see a doctor if that's the case. But I'm just
Right.
even talking not even about whether there's a medical issue. You say, ouch, please stop. And you do it
Mhm.
immediately. I hear so many, again, younger people, especially who are like, well, I thought he was almost at, orgasm. So I just thought, let me just get this over with.
Right.
Pain is not okay in
Right.
sex
Mhm.
unless you're into BDSM, which is a whole different topic.
Right.
Otherwise, no. You
Right.
speak immediately, you use your voice.
Mhm.
And a lot of women, especially my generation, I'm imagining your generation,
Right.
never ever said when something hurt.
Right. And they do just force their way through it. And then they spend 3 or 4 days in pain generally. And then they don't want to have any kind of sexual contact whatsoever. And when there's pain, we tend to lock into that pain. And so we're really hesitant the next time we're clenched, we're not loose. And that causes even greater pain.
Yeah, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because your
Yeah.
body now expects pain, so it
Right.
protects itself. Yes, I see
Right.
that all the time.
Same, same. Let's talk about what happens when, and we're kind of moving through so many experiences here. Maybe we have a greater, more in-depth conversation at another time too. Is when we get into a space where we have been with a partner for a very long time, we're not in a space of really exploring what do I like now? What do you like now? What happens is one, we're not having the sex dates, and two, sex becomes a chore and we just stop. That
Hmm.
becomes a major issue in a lot of marriages, but we don't want to ruffle the feathers of our partners. We're too comfortable and we
Hmm.
end up just ceasing sex altogether.
Yeah. So sexless marriages, or I'm just going to talk about it as sexless relationships, because it
Yeah,
certainly you don't need to be married to have a sexless relationship. So,
right.
there's a lot of, there's not an actual real definition of
Hmm.
sexless, but most people talk about a sexless marriage as not having had sex in the last year and
Hmm.
not having intercourse more than 10 times. I mean, it's having intercourse less than 10 times a year.
Right,
And they're different statistic, but probably about 15% of all relationships are sexless.
right,
And frankly, who are we kidding? It's a lot more than that because who goes
right,
around admitting they don't have sex with their partner? So talk
right.
about shame. That's probably the biggest thing to be ashamed about that, I mean, people feel shame about
Right.
and so frankly, let's talk about it, right?
Yeah.
So it's very common and there are a lot of reasons for it, but
Mm-hmm.
how to work on it. Well, first of all, you have to find out how your partner feels about the fact that you're in a sexless, relationship,
Yeah.
or you're not having the amount of sex you want, or and that's a hard conversation. That's a
Right.
conversation that you don't just spring it on your partner. You
Mm-hmm.
let them know that, you want to have a conversation and you actually set aside a little time to talk about it. You don't just do it, in the car when you're 10 minutes away from your destination. But it's really important to actually just name it and then
Right.
find out how your partner feels. Sexless marriages are not in and of themselves a problem if
Right.
both partners agree. But if
Mm-hmm.
both partners do not agree, then there's a problem. So you
Right.
got to talk about it. And then there are lots of ways to, work on a sexless relationship,
Mm-hmm.
which is, first of all, to start working on different kinds of touch.
Right.
So, starting to hug your partner more and kiss
Mm-hmm.
your partner more and rub their back, and really just working on the kind of the affectionate touch, increasing flirtation, trying to
Yes.
work on that.
Yeah.
So, a quick, a sexy comment or
Mm-hmm.
sexting, you know, kind of working on that. Again, it can be very awkward. So I always tell
Yeah.
people, like, it's going to be awkward. You'll manage, you'll get through it, especially if you're both doing the awkward thing.
Yeah.
You can't just ask one partner to go outside their comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
Both have to do that.
Right.
And after you've worked on, flirtation, you get to sort of more sensual touch, right? Which is, foot massage, back massage,
Mm-hmm.
spooning, and can be naked, not naked. And then you're going to work towards more erotic touch.
Mm-hmm.
So that's non-intercourse sexual activities.
Right.
So, oral stimulation, digital stimulation, manual touch, mutual masturbation, that kind of thing.
Right.
And then, of course, you hope to get to intercourse when you've
Right.
worked on this.
Right.
Um, I also want to really talk about the difference between spontaneous and responsive desire, which I'm sure you know a lot about.
Yes. Yes. Please. Let's go for that.
Okay. So Emily Nagoski has a wonderful book called Come As You Are. I encourage
Mm-hmm.
everybody to read it. So most people wait until they feel desire
Mm-hmm.
and then they decide to have sex.
Right.
Well, when you've got 3 kids, a full-time job, a cold, and, a ton on your mind,
Right.
thinking that desire is going to strike you,
Yeah.
like a lightning bolt is really futile. That's not how it's going to happen.
Right.
Now, it might have happened that way when you were 17 and this was your first sexual experience,
Right.
but likely that's not going to happen. So, let me just define. So,
Yes.
spontaneous desire is when a person wants sex immediately after recognizing like a sex related stimulus.
Right.
So you get turned on by your partner's, perfume, or
Mm-hmm.
there's that anticipation of sexual pleasure. And
Right.
that is spontaneous. And that's a lot more prominent in the beginning of a relationship.
Right.
But responsive desire is actually the way we mostly have sex. And
Right.
mostly this is what happens in long-term relationships. So responsive desire is when a person experiences desire in response to actual sexual pleasure.
Right.
So they create desire after kissing, something like that. So often I will encourage people that they need to stimulate themselves
Mm-hmm.
before the desire comes. So you
Right.
cannot wait for desire. You have to work on arousal first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if you know you want to have sex with your partner because it's healthy for the relationship and you
Right.
believe in it and it's something you want, but you are not feeling it, right? That whole idea of not in the mood. This is what I tell everyone. You are 100% responsible for your own sexuality. Your
Right.
sexuality is yours. So I encourage women especially, listen to erotica on the way
Mhm.
home from work. If you
Right.
know you might want to have sex or you have a sex date, take responsibility for turning yourself on.
Right.
Go home and, or
Right.
do something that will turn yourself on. I often encourage people, go into the bathroom, grab your vibrator and masturbate for a few minutes.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then the desire comes. And this
Right.
is what women and men know.
Right.
A man will say, well, I'm not in the mood, but then actually we were into the foreplay, then I was into it.
Right.
So
Right.
you and women will say, I so was not in the mood, but then I actually end up enjoying it.
Right.
That's responsive desire.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
set yourself up for success and do not wait for desire to strike you
Right.
because it likely won't with
Exactly.
all the responsibilities and things that are going on in
Right.
our lives. It just doesn't work that way anymore. And so you have to know that. And everybody complains sex is supposed to be spontaneous.
Doesn't have to be.
It doesn't
Yeah.
have to be, and more likely, it's not gonna
Not
be.
going to be.
So
Yeah.
you also have to sort of get over the, I want to rip your clothes off kind of thing that we see, in Hollywood, frankly. I
Right.
mean, I just did a podcast and the podcaster titled it Hollywood Ruined Us. And I think they did
Yeah.
because,
Agreed.
there's not a lot of, 50 and 60-year-olds who are tearing clothes off on the kitchen table.
Right.
If that happens, that's amazing. But
Right.
often not like that.
I don't even think that there's a lot of 20-year-olds that are doing that, right? Because we're just awkward as hell anyway. So we don't want to be in that space of like, oh no, what are we doing here? And feeling a lot of people will say, I feel stupid when I do these things. And well, okay, because it's not natural, but that doesn't mean it can't be. It's again back to that just stimulus and trying the new things. You mentioned something that I heard every woman listening to this that has not moved into this space yet go, ugh, which is that self-play with a vibrator or a toy or something like that. There is so much shame around that experience.
Yeah, again, things that always shock me are when, 56-year-old women have never used a vibrator. So, yes, lots of shame. I do want to also mention that I think men contribute to this shame
Agreed.
around vibrators
Hmm.
because often, I'll say, well, did you bring your, when a woman has a vibrator,
Hmm.
so, can you bring your vibrator into your, relationship?
Hmm.
And they'll be like, no, he would feel so threatened by it.
Hmm.
And, I just don't, and men will say they're not open to that.
Hmm.
Well, aren't you open to lube?
Right.
Aren't you open to Viagra? Those are
Yeah.
all tools. A
Right.
vibrator is a tool.
Right.
And if you know that intercourse alone is very unlikely to, have your partner orgasm, why aren't you welcoming a vibrator or,
Right.
want a toy into the sexual experience? And
Mhm.
also lots of toys for men that can be, beneficial
Right.
is for both of you. So
Right.
there are all these partner toys now. So lots of shame. But I really encourage women to really push through that with their
Hmm.
partner. Why is it threatening? It's not a penis. You got the penis. So why
Yeah.
is it so threatening?
I love that you put it that way because again, it is threatening. It does feel like an impasse for a lot of people, and it doesn't have to be. Look, let's just put it like this. Whatever it is that you are desiring, as long as there's consensual partners, what is the problem?
Yeah.
What's the
Yeah.
problem?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's such a great point, right?
Yeah.
And again, consent, consent, consent. But after
Mhm.
that, do what you want.
So be it, right? Yeah. And talking, you've made a point several times, and I want to bring this up. Talking to our daughters when it's appropriate about what true sexual experience is and giving them, if you have a healthy relationship as well, what it looks like to flirt with the spouse, what it looks like to innocently pass by, to kiss, to hug, to those things. Our daughters, I have two daughters that one's in college, one's a junior in high school, and we have a son as well. And so they see and they're like, oh, here they are again. But they see a healthy experience that they know is an intimate sexual experience with their parents who've been married over 20 years, right? So show your kids this, have conversations.
Yeah, it's beautiful modeling. So great
Yeah.
job. And when I see people, I'll say, well, what was physical touch like in the home you were growing up? And they'll
Hmm.
say, I never once saw my parents kiss.
Right.
I never once saw them being remotely sensual at
Hmm.
all.
Right.
And so then that sends, I mean, that's the modeling. And so that person is often not excited about touch, and they
Yeah.
kind of, they don't like to be touched sometimes.
Right.
So they also sometimes go the other direction and are,
Too much.
maybe sharing too much, right? So
Yeah.
there is that too. But I also want to really talk about this idea of willingness to try.
Hmm.
So I think that's really the key to long-term sexual relationships, which
Right.
is, I'm not really in the mood, but why don't we try for 5 minutes and let's see if
Hmm.
anything changes? So at the end of the day, having flexibility and
Hmm.
being willing to try new things, especially, one of the things I love doing is I give couples a sexual activity list, and you can find these online too. And it
Right.
basically says all the different sexual acts, you
Mm.
know, rimming or,
Mhm.
sex in public or, blowjob or whatever. And
Right.
then you rate it, absolutely want to try, maybe,
Right.
neutral, not likely, or a hard no.
Right.
And you have them fill it out, you know, uh, separately. And then
Right.
you have them come together and take time to go over it. So you're
Mm.
looking for the overlap. And
Right.
I'm telling you, people are shocked about what their partner
Right.
either is opposed, vehemently opposed to, or is
Hmm.
super excited to try, or, oh my God, I had no idea that that's something you might do.
Right.
And that alone, you farm out the awkward conversation, because how
Right.
likely is a couple to say, hey, are you interested in rimming? But if
Right.
it's written on a page and you just have
Right.
to check a box,
Right.
then you get to talk about it that
Right.
way. It's on paper. You must read the paper. So I
Right.
love the idea of just kind of helping couples talk about awkward things by sort of farming it out a little bit
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
asking them to have a conversation. And yes, that conversation might also be awkward, but it's way less awkward. That's huge. So that willingness to try, and I really cannot stress enough, you got to get over the resistance to sex dates and scheduling sex.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you schedule your workouts, then you should be scheduling sex.
Yeah.
And most people do schedule their workouts because it's important to them.
Exactly. That's going to lead to the question, what is the appropriate, even though that's not the right word, but it's the word that's used often in session, what's the appropriate amount of sex each week or each month for a couple? And I kind of giggle, but I'd love to hear what you what you have to say on that.
I have no idea what is right for you.
Thank you.
That is my answer. I have
Exactly.
no idea what works for you.
Right.
Now, it does mean that often couples, I think they should talk about the amount of sex they would like,
Right.
but they also should talk about the quality of sex they would like.
Hmm. Hmm.
But again, this is, it is the number one thing women talk about when they're together. How often do you
Right.
guys have sex? How often do you guys have sex?
Right.
And it's amazing to me that that comparison is so huge. I mean, I
Hmm.
do get it because we want to feel normal. We
Right.
want to feel like we're doing it right. And
Hmm.
because we gauge sex as a barometer of the health of the relationship,
Yes.
which is
Yes.
also a huge problem. Because I
Yes.
know couples who are close to divorce and they're still having great sex.
Right. Yep.
So, I mean, they may be interrelated, but it's
Right.
not always a barometer.
Right.
So, look, that brings me to another really important point.
Hmm.
All couples have libido discrepancies.
Uh,
All
yeah.
couples have someone with a higher libido and
Hmm.
a lower libido.
Right.
There's no way you can be perfectly matched. It's just
Right.
not a thing.
Right.
Now, some people are more off than, and some people are closer. And that obviously,
Right.
if that gap is not too big, that's much better. But
Right.
that's not always the case.
Right.
So you have to negotiate. You negotiate everything
Mhm.
else in marriage.
Right.
What's wrong with negotiating sex?
Right.
I want it 5 times a week. I
Mhm.
want it once a month. Those
Right.
are super far apart, but you
Huge.
also need to talk about why you want it 5 times a week
Mhm.
and why you feel that once a month is good for you, because
Right.
you want to explore that. You don't want to blame the woman. I say the
Mhm.
woman. See, there I go with my own sexism, right? I'm
Right.
saying that the woman has a lower libido, which is
Right.
absolutely false.
It's true. I'm glad you said that.
I see so many men who just don't, they're not interested. Their
Yeah.
libido has gone down.
Yeah.
As they age, aging is a huge factor here.
Right.
And they're not that interested. And then
Mhm.
because that's not the gender way we often see it, the stereotype is, and I
Mhm.
just went right into that stereotype, that women have lower libidos. And
Right.
then there is incredible amount of shame for men. And
Right.
then for women, it's what is wrong with my husband? He should want it every day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's also complete bullshit.
Right.
We're human beings and our
Yeah.
libido is ours. It's
Right.
our personal thing and so much affects it.
Right.
So it's important to talk about and really look at, where are you and can we negotiate a little bit,
Mhm. Mhm.
no way that guy's winning at 5 times a week, but
Right.
we also want to push, that other partner toward a
Mhm.
little bit more frequently and figure out how would you, under what circumstances might you want to have sex more? And guess
Right.
what? The person might say, if you did the dishes, I think I'd want to have sex more. And
Right.
that's really true. And I do see this again gendered. Women carry the mental load. We just know that.
Right.
And so I do find that women, will say, you know, I I really think sometimes when he does the dishes or takes the
Mhm.
trash out, I actually feel more attracted to him
Yep. Yep.
because I feel taken care of. And
Right.
when I feel taken care of, I can turn that part of me on that really loves him
Mhm.
and wants to show affection. Nothing kills libido more than resentment.
Right. Exactly. I'll often ask my couples, okay, are you partners? Well, yeah, we make all the decisions together. Like, great. Okay, so are we helping in the housework? Oh, no. Are we helping with this? Are we doing this? Where does the partnership end? And then they realize, oh, there's so much more to a partnership. I'm like, that's why we're not getting to the sex part, guys. It's because we don't have a true partnership across the board. The relationships where you're seeing partnerships, in full blossom have really good sex.
I agree completely. And
Yeah.
you can't, you can't overlook that.
Right.
And so, one of the things I think about is, for, a man, again, with that mental load on the woman, you know, if you want more sex or you want to be desired,
Hmm.
do an errand for your
Hmm.
spouse without telling them that you're, going to do it, or without it being assigned to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go do an errand. Take one thing
Mm.
off her mental load, right?
Yeah.
Because, desire is in the brain,
Right.
arousal is in the body. The
Right.
brain is the most important thing. And most
Yeah.
women say, I just can't relax. Well, they
Yes.
can't relax because they're doing 85,000 things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So help them relax. And that's the other thing around sexless marriages. One thing I've been talking to people about recently is adding in transition time, a transition activity.
Mm.
Because people say, I can't go from, putting the screaming toddler down to bed or
Right.
nursing a baby
Right.
to wanting to have sex.
Right.
So, of course, you can't do that.
Right.
Put in a transition activity, take a warm bath, put
Hmm.
soft lotion on your body, do
Right.
something that take a walk,
Right.
anything, and or meditate.
Right.
Do a transition activity so you can create more space in your brain for the idea of pleasure.
Hmm.
And you can't do that when you're running around, crazy all the time. It's just not
Right.
possible. And
Right.
we ask women to do it all the time. Why
Every
aren't you
day.
in the mood? It's
Right.
night. Why aren't you in the mood? We're in
Yeah.
bed, for God's sake.
Right.
And ask them what they're thinking about,
Yeah.
And so you've got to calm the mind.
Yes. Yes. Sex, intimacy is a full body experience.
Yeah.
And the full body has to be involved, mental,
Mm-hmm.
emotional, physical, and there's so much more to that. We have so much to talk about, and yet we're running out of time. What's the one thing, and I know that that's a loaded question, that someone could really do other than some of the things we've talked about to really get into a space where we're willing to open the mind to something new sexually?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question and a hard question.
It is.
Yeah, I think understanding that in life, nothing changes until you step outside your comfort zone. And
Mhm.
that's the same with sex.
Right.
Nothing improves or changes, even
Right.
really, without one step outside your comfort zone.
Yeah.
If that's true in the rest of your life, then it's also true in sex. So
Mhm.
that again, willingness to take a step out, knowing that it might be terrible.
Right.
And frankly, mostly it's not.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
never as bad. I tell my patients with anxiety who, avoid, avoid, avoid.
Right.
When they finally do it, I say, was it as horrible as you expected? And
Yeah.
the answer is 99.9% no.
No.
I always say the only thing that has ever been worse than I imagined was childbirth.
There you
Other than
go.
that, other than that,
Right.
actually nothing is as bad as you think it's going to be.
Right. I love that. Be open, be willing, be in a space where you're willing to learn about what you
Mhm.
want and need and be open to really find that and progress into a space that intimacy, not only with the self, but with a partner or whomever it is that you're choosing to share these moments with, it has a real joy to it. It doesn't have to be so vanilla, so boring, so taboo. Let's put it that way.
Yes.
How can we find you on the different platforms, whether website or social media, so that when you hear this conversation, you say, oh, there's so much more for me to explore. So where can we find you?
You can find me at brookbralove.com, and I'm on Instagram, Brooke Bralove Psychotherapy,
Mhm.
TikTok, Be Bralove Psychotherapy. And I'd love to hear from listeners, but it's been super fun today.
No, I think that we have more conversations to have. I would love for you to come back. There's so many little places to delve into. We just kind of scratched the surface. But mostly, at least from my perspective, please, ladies, have sex, whether with yourself or someone else. My gosh, there's so much joy and pleasure in just sensation. So please do that. It is a part of getting your life together. If this is an absent part of your life, you're not all together, ladies. You've got to move through that. Thank you for your time, for your knowledge, for being willing to talk about something that we all need.
Thank you.
While sex certainly isn't everything in a relationship, it does play a major role. I do hope that this conversation opened your eyes a little bit about what you can do to spice up your sex life, or at least make some changes in it so that you can have greater connectivity and satisfaction within your relationship. Of course, everything takes work in relationships, and this is no different. I want to thank you for listening to the Get Your Life Together Girl podcast. If you've enjoyed these tips for bettering your life and are seeking daily inspiration and additional tools and tips, if you're not already, follow me on social media at Get Your Life Together Girl on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Clapper, and now Threads. You can also visit my website at getyourlifetogethergirl.com to visit the show notes, the blog, merch store, and even some great courses. If you've enjoyed this episode, please feel free to share it with a family member or a friend, as it helps spread the word about what we're doing here at Get Your Life Together Girl. I want to invite you as well to hit subscribe so that you do not miss a single episode. Thank you for being a valuable member of this community. Until next time, be kind to yourself and others.